Welcome to the Payne Memorial Building. This is a very interesting opportunity. This particular building was built in 1925. There are a number of interested parties and various organizations. The Thomas Paine Cottage, as many of you know, is one organization to preserve the legacy of Thomas Paine. Another one is this building, which is the Memorial Building. It was built to house the collection and the artifacts of Thomas Paine. And until not too long ago, a couple of years back, when the artifacts and the writings were moved to Iona Library for safekeeping because of climate control, this building was now thrown into question. What do we do with it? And the Thomas Paine Cottage is working with a Landmarks Commission, and this building was recently landmarks due to the efforts of many community members. And so the idea is to use this building for community events, and we're proud that the art show of the New Rochelle Art Association is the first of many activities that will take place in this particular building. There are 6 artists involved, and the theme of this show is Common Sense Revisited. Of course, written by Thomas Paine. Perhaps many of you, like myself, read Common Sense when I read it when I was in high school, but I'm rereading it. By the way, this photo op, I want you to know, right side up, correct. The Thomas Paine writings, The Age of Reason as well, is an extraordinary, simple manuscript written and influencing the revolution in America as well as in France. And so the 6 artists who contributed to this each took the times and the quotes from Thomas Paine and developed it into their idea of what a painting would tell that words perhaps do not. So we invite you to the building. It's an extraordinary opportunity. Many of you who have lived in New Rochelle for even 50 years have not been inside the building, as I understand. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to see the building, engage with it, and enjoy it. It's a legacy. Inside this wonderful space, the Thomas Paine Museum, which was built in 1925 as a museum for the memorabilia and the artifacts of Thomas Paine. 7 years ago, the memorabilia and all the artifacts and all the writings of Thomas Paine that they owned was sent over to Iona Library, where it is now housed because they have the climate control to safeguard the materials. It's hard to get to that, and it's hard to make arrangements, as I understand it. And so the Thomas Paine Cottage Group will be working at making this part of their association, and they will borrow artifacts as needed when they have an exhibit or they have a concert or when they have a lecture or a book signing. This is the first event in this new venture, and we're very proud to be part of that. There are 6 artists who have contributed by reading Common Sense, thinking about the times as they really have direct meaning to us. And in this particular case, we have a photographer, Mary Jo Viola, who has used the landscape and the outside space, which is part of certainly the revolutionary times, the area, the 300 acres that was given to Thomas Paine as a result of his influence in the American Revolution was in New Rochelle. And so while there are Thomas Paine museums at various spots in the United States, here in New Rochelle, we should be proud of the fact and we should maintain that legacy. And so the outside, the landscape is going to be seen in a number of the paintings. Murray Beaver is another one of the artists who contributed to this special exhibit. His take, and all 3 of his paintings actually, are to commemorate the revolutionary time period as well as our own. And so in this one, we see soldiers and we see the stars and stripes and we see people distant apart. He's talking about contemporary times and he's talking about our flag. And I actually asked him why he didn't include the 50 stars. And in a very charming way, because he's a primitive painter, in a very charming way, he explained, too tough to do 50 stars. So he did this new configuration. In this painting, he felt that this figure looked like a revolutionary figure. And he's right when you think about it. And he felt that this person yelling and talking to each other. This is what we're dealing with now. People are protesting, people are complaining, people are trying to change society. And with it all, he almost has this 60s-like figure, this very freedom kind of hippie guy. And he said that was his reference. He is in the middle of all this. Peace is good. That's what we need now. And in this one, he has a bird flying, and he's talking about peace, even though there's also a gun, and there's also firecrackers, and we're also really celebrating a holiday weekend when we once again talk about something uniquely American. Joel Benedetto is one of the painters. Each one of us is a member of the New Rochelle Art Association, and he has chosen to work from a photograph that he took at the Quaker Village, a little bit north of where we are. Again, an interesting time period and very reference to the kinds of ideas that the farmers and the American revolutionaries were involved with in the soil and the land and the landscape. And this picture is from one building looking out into another. And if any of you have ever been to that Quaker village, you'll see some of the unique qualities of their handcraft and their work as Quakers. And as I understand it, Thomas Paine was a deist. And so his belief in a creator is very, very important to us as we reference that period of time as well as our own. Patricia Pardini was my partner in curating the show. She's a wonderful artist and created this piece specifically for this exhibit. And you'll see the essential workers in the forefront giving full credit to these important people, as well as the red, white, and blue. And so it speaks for itself, and it's easy to read this because the figures are so exact in their simplicity. And we know exactly what she's thinking and what she's trying to celebrate. My paintings are part of this exhibit as well. And the theme that I selected was peace. And shalom and the birds, certainly the dove, I think is a universal symbol of peace. As far as the statement from Thomas Paine, his statement in Common Sense was that if he was not able to achieve or reach peace in his time, at least for his children, and I'm adding for grandchildren. And I think this is what we're dealing with now. We all understand that. We keep fighting, we keep trying, we keep negotiating, and the hope is, we don't have it now, but we'll get there, and we'll get there for them. This second painting was not done for this show, for this exhibit, but I think suits the theme very well. And that is this globe, this earth, this circle, this completeness is actually ashrei. And when we read the ashrei, we read every letter of the alphabet as part of the ashrei. Many of you know that. But there's one letter that's missing in the ashrei as the beginning letter of that sentence, and that's the nun. And so the idea of v'nasnu, the nun in v'nasnu, which is also read the same backwards and forward. Also, this is a diptych. There are two parts to the painting, two separate canvases that fit together. And so it's the idea that when you give v'nasnu, when you give and you contribute, then you have a complete world. That's really very Tom Paine, even though that's not what it was intended to do initially. This painting was not done for this show and doesn't fit the theme, but it really is an introduction to some of my other paintings and other art that we're going to see in a few minutes. And this painting is a very, very large painting, probably 3 feet by 5.5 feet, and it's comprised of 24 separate canvases that are attached together. And the work that I do, as you'll see in just a little while, is very abstract. The abstract color is a blast of color, and it's wild, and it's almost Jackson Pollock-like, in my opinion. The art is not completely controlled. I'm really participating in a joint effort, and it's a surprise to me sometimes when I see the way the color dries. The paint that I use is oil and acrylic, They don't mix. Oil and water do not mix. But it's that tension that is created and replicated and done again in the calligraphy with the abstraction. The calligraphy is very controlled. The thick and thin of the Hebrew letter, I think, is very elegant. But it's a controlled, contrived, organized system. When I throw the paint at the canvas and then I manipulate the canvas and I work with the canvas, that's very, very much a surprise to me at times. And so the combination and that tension is my work. This one is Shivisi Hashem Lenekti Tamid, that we see God before us at all times. And we begin to see, I think, if you look closely, you begin to see almost letters forming in the abstraction, in the accident, and the accident informs the calligraphy, and the control really also informs the color. Welcome to my home, my gallery, my work. The piece that we have here is more recent, very recent, and it is done as a tapestry. So it's paint on fabric and sewn, stitched into the open spaces that I intentionally leave in the artwork. And so this is very, very soft fabric. And the idea is to create the theme and let it flow. It's not perfectly flat, but it's done as a tapestry. The very first group of tapestries that I did, this particular one is by Hior. And so the light and the color is almost self-explanatory. The very first series that I did of tapestries was in the year 2000. It was shortly after we visited the Whitney Museum, where they had the Gee's Bend women's tapestries. It was a very interesting and very important thing for me, because at that point I decided that I would go full-time, spend full-time into the art, into my studio, and I needed something that would really thrust me into painting and working every single day rather than occasionally. And so the Gee's Bend women sewed pieces of fabric, and it was just squares and rectangles in color. And when you have a chance, you can look it up and you'll see that on the one hand, it's simply quilts. But when put in place at the Whitney Museum with the other art and the other modern and abstract art, for me, it meant that work on fabric and what could be a craft could also be art. And so the sewing and the stitching, and here the paint has one surface so that it reflects and refracts light differently than the soft stitches of the wool. And I think you'll see it in one or two other pieces, but the very first that I did in the series in 2000 was a series of 7 chupot. And we're not going to look at those today, but I welcome you at another time to look at the chupot. Each one is, again, 3 months, 4 months worth of work, where there's painting and sewing, and each piece is 8 by 8 feet. A bit different than the artwork is some of the Judaica that I've designed, Seder plates and so on. We're not going to look at all of them, but this particular grouping, and I do a lot of series, is the iris. And the iris with the bulb and the roots and the flowers that we can see, I think, very easily on the candlesticks. We continue that theme in a number of pieces of Judaica, so that the contemporary and modern Judaica that is sold not by me, but can be seen online, and there are a whole number of other things, is exciting to me because it's meaningful. I think that everything that we use, Zekeli V'Anvehu, we want to beautify whatever we use, and so this is important to me, but in a different category than painting. The work that's here is very, very small, and it's something that I really have not repeated in terms of design. But this was done for a competition, a group show at the Hebrew Union College Museum. And that museum is near NYU, and they have a show once a year. I've been in it a number of times. And this was the home show, the idea of home. And so I took the idea of the mezuzah. which to me is the very beginning. You don't walk into your home or establish it without the mezuzah. And so the three letters that we often see on the case of the mezuzah is cut and is open. And inside is the Shema. And so inside this red, burning, hot Shema, wrapped in the very cool blue and green, is encased in the plexiglass. And the piece itself is very small. The piece itself is probably 8 inches square. The two paintings that I'm in front of are, I think, prime examples of the work that I do with letters. To me, the idea of a Hebrew letter is not only a beautiful image, but it also is very meaningful. It's the beginning of all knowledge. With the letters we build words, with the words we build sentences, and so on until we have complete thoughts. And so at the very beginning of this idea, there is a series that I did on the Aleph base. And you'll see, I'm pretty intent on doing series, because when I get an idea, there's another idea that is an outgrowth of the first, and all of a sudden, a year or 2 or 3 later, I'm working on that idea, and at the same time working on ketubot and other things as well. And so this painting, the idea of Bereshis and the Aleph, is a very important thing, not only for adults, but for kids. That's how we start telling them about their study of Bereshis. They're going to start studying the Chumash, and we start talking to them about why the Beis and not the Aleph. These are critical. These are the things that we grow up on. And so this painting with Bereshis, and the Aleph is really jumping out at us, it gives a message. Not just my message, but your message. What do you think of when you look at that? In a similar vein, this painting, where we talk about, again, Bereshit, it's a variation on the same thing. But this one works out to be a very different thought. And that is jumping out of the Bereshit, right in the center, is the Aleph and the Shin, Aish. And so the fiery color that jumps out and is really shadowing other activities, that's part of this. I'm telling you what I think of when I look at the painting. I'm telling you what I think of when I develop a painting. What I need you to do is look at my paintings at some point without me, and you tell me what you think. The paintings that we have here, again, using the warm and the cool colors, these are all very basic concepts, and the fire behind it, again, I think is very, very obvious. But I invite you to really think on your own. The series that I'm going to go through now are Sheshes Yemei Bereshis, the 6 days of creation. And you're going to see in these paintings not only the word, but the symbolism and the color. And you're going to see the 6 colors of the rainbow and the 6 colors of the color wheel, the primary, secondary colors. And it's not necessarily in that order, but that's pretty much what I've done. And so the Echad is in the center of this first day. But the Echad means a lot more to us, and we know that. This painting, as each of the other paintings, were not only created to be held horizontal, vertical, but also on a diagonal. And so each of these paintings, as I go through the 6, will really demonstrate to you the way this series was created. And so on the second day, we talk about the firmament, we talk about the heavens and earth. And when we turn that as well, we see not only the words, but we see the feeling, we see the sky, we see the earth, we see the water, we see the beginning of what we know as our earth. On the third day, as you probably remember, and if you don't, this is certainly a clue to it, but the green of the desha, of the grass, of the growth, is what we're looking at as well. In this series, I have used to varying degrees just one word or many words, but Yom Revi'i, where we talk about the light, the yellow and the orange, perfect. In some cases, I use a few words, and when I use the words, they're from the Torah, and the Torah words in the Bereshis explains the creation so beautifully, so poetically, that it fits in as well. And when we talk about the 5th day of creation, we're talking about life, and the life force is this red. And the red is very, very, very important to us because it's a color that burns within us. This color when placed next to each of the other paintings, begins to jump out in a very visceral way. The sixth in this series, Yom HaShishi, that's when mankind was created. And so it's still the blood, and it's still the blood that runs through and courses through our veins. I did not do the Shabbat. Shabbos is a separate series. I did 13 paintings, arbitrarily 13. I'll show you one of those, and we'll look at that in just 1 minute. But the Shabbat deserved a whole other series all to its own because it's very, very complex in my mind. And the idea of Shabbat and the idea of resting, creating rest, creating the ability to stop, we're going to look at that in a minute. As discussed, the Shabbos is a series unto itself. I'm going to show you one of the series, and this is the idea of the Shabbat, which leads us to a different level. The Shabbat, the rest over here, moves us higher and higher and higher. And you'll notice in the sky, there are other things that we say and repeat. And these are the things that we look at, and these are the things that we sing, and this is our liturgy. And this is written into the direction. But it's not simply for the sake of writing the Pesukim. It is not the idea of transcribing the Torah. It's the idea that these letters also have a direction. And the same way that the painting and the strokes in the painting have a direction, so do these letters. Sometimes they're separate, and sometimes they're just repeating over and over and over again. And then the person who does not read Hebrew can also understand that there's another meaning. It goes way beyond words. A number of years ago, I self-published a book after I did a series of the Aleph Bet. And the Aleph Bet is, to me, as I explained, the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of learning. There was one year where I had the Aleph Bet series posted on a fence in the north of Israel. At that time, there was an annual festival where they had the arts and music in Nahariya, and it was right at the border. And the fence went on for miles, and each artist was given a part of the fence. And so the idea was bridging the gap, bridging the two sides of the fence, and mine again was the idea of Aleph Bet, the beginning of knowledge. So I compiled it, into a book where every letter is a painting, which I have separately, and for each letter there's also the idea that there is another work of art. And so for various reasons, each letter that we look at, the Lamed, the Lev, the heart, it's very abstract because I am interested in color. Here, the Tzadi, the letter itself becomes a design. The Tzadi here is centered as it's fractured, and it becomes an idea that the Tzadi at the center can radiate and can bring many, many good things to the world. The idea of doing one is always a good idea for me, and this one is the idea of the cloth that we use over the challah for Shabbos, for Yantif, and so on. And so doing one was a good idea, and it's machine sewn with the machine embroidery with the painting, similar to the work that I did with the tapestry. And here, some of them are for Shabbat, and some of them are for Yantif. And there are various Yom Tovim as well, but when you put it together, it makes a different statement. It's no longer just a cloth on the challah. It now becomes a wall hanging, it becomes another idea, and becomes art. Transforming our observations and our religion into art has been a mainstay. On a whole other level, with many, many works, what I did was a series of 150 prints, watercolor prints. And these watercolors in 3 volumes are all hand-done, are all one of a kind, and each one has one pasuk from one kapitel of Tehillim, and so 150 images. A long project, many years. However, I don't just work on one thing at a time. And so while I was working on these watercolors with the one sentence and the Hebrew calligraphy, again, part of the Tehillim, I was also working on other things. I was working on Ketubot, I was working on the Judaica, and I was painting. And so at any one time, what I do, and I think this is important to me and it may be of interest to you, and that is I work on something, I leave it, I walk away from it, I look at it critically, I come back to it, I work into it, and sometimes even though it is a quick beginning, it's a very slow ending because it needs a lot of consideration.